An Anarchist Story, Ethel MacDonald, Movie Review. So I'm classifying this as a movie. I saw this online. I believe it was originally produced for BBC television. So it's not like a movie like it got a theatrical release, but you can watch it online. I think you can order the DVD or the video. I'm classifying it as a movie. You could also classify it as a TV special, maybe. I think, I'm not entirely sure what the history of this was. I think it was produced for the BBC. It's a documentary, but it's one of those documentaries that kind of mixes in archival footage with actors kind of recreating scenes. Similar to the BBC series, Days That Shook the World, if you've ever seen that. Yeah, it looks like it was produced for a TV show budget, and these kind of recreated scenes give it a bit of a cheesy feel at times, but the constant visuals also help to give the narrative, to give more of a narrative to what otherwise might be a bit of a muddled history of the Spanish Civil War. Actually, let me start at the top. This is a documentary about Ethel MacDonald, who was Scottish, from Scotland, but who went down and was participating in the Spanish Civil War as a journalist and as an advocate and a partisan, and she was one of the leaders of the Anarchist movement. So it's about kind of the anarchists in the Spanish Civil War. Now, Ethel MacDonald, if you go to her Wikipedia page, she was a Scottish anarchist, and she was active in a number of causes throughout her life. For example, she was also active in the 1950s peace movement towards the end of her life. Again, according to Wikipedia. That's not in the documentary. This documentary covers her early life just very briefly and then kind of focuses on her involvement in the Spanish Civil War. The documentary is really about the Spanish Civil War as much as it is about Ethel MacDonald, but it kind of uses Ethel MacDonald's personal story to kind of tell the story of the Spanish Civil War, which is a good choice, I think. The Spanish Civil War, you know, being kind of a history nerd and someone who's interested in radical history, Spanish Civil War is something I've been interested in a long time, but it's really complicated. I mean, whenever you try and pull out a history of the Spanish Civil War, it's just so complicated, all the internal politics, all the international politics, all the different factions. So to kind of tell that story through the lens of kind of one person's experience, I mean, in one way it complicates the story because you've got the whole story of the Civil War going on, plus the story of Ethel MacDonald, but in another way it kind of simplifies the story because you just have kind of one lens to view it with. In addition to kind of the recreated scenes, the archival footage, and the kind of docudrama stuff, they also do the standard talking head experts in this in this documentary. The only one that was at all recognizable to me was Noam Chomsky. Chomsky doesn't talk at all about Ethel MacDonald. I don't know if they just didn't ask him any questions about her, or maybe didn't know anything particular about her. But he does fill in a lot of the history of the Spanish Civil War, and he also gives kind of analysis of the anarchist philosophy that the anarchists in Spain or Ethel MacDonald were defending. Yeah, I'm a big Noam Chomsky fan. He's brilliant, articulate, and a pleasure to listen to, as always. The story about Ethel MacDonald and the Spanish Civil War kind of turns on the betrayal in Barcelona. So at a certain point in 1937, the anarchists and the communists had been on the same side in the Spanish Civil War, and then the communists turned against the anarchists. This was also the subject of George Orwell's famous book, Homage to Catalonia. Homage or homage? I don't know. Or Orwell's book. Which also, the key parts of that book, or at least the end of that book, focused on the 1937 kind of betrayal in Barcelona, where the communists turned against the anarchists. Ethel MacDonald was on the ground in this period. I had to go into hiding and kind of escape from the communist police during this time. And they kind of go into all of this in the documentary. So it's really interesting to watch. Yeah, this betrayal in Barcelona, I mentioned this was also a key part of Orwell's book. To digress a little bit, kind of moving away more from the movie itself to kind of talking about the wider issue. When I was younger, I hung out in activist circles, and a lot of the people in those circles would self-identify as anarchist, and I did at the time myself. There was some people felt very passionately that anarchists should never make common cause with communists. And one of the big reasons why is what happened in Barcelona. The other reason is what happened in Russia after the revolution, when again the communists turned on the anarchists. I remember vividly, actually, one meeting where this woman was kind of going on and on about it, how, you know, anarchists have no business ever cooperating with communists for any reason on any cause due to kind of the history. The reason why she felt so passionate about this, or the reason why it was something worth remarking on in the first place, is, as you know, if you've been involved in these kind of activist circles in the US, it's a smattering of ideologies. There's some people who you'd call themselves communists, some people who call themselves anarchists, at least in kind of these kind of smaller Midwestern towns. There's not kind of enough of any of one ideology to form any kind of big group. So it's kind of a smattering of different ideologies. And it seemed natural that we kind of worked together on the issues we were all kind of in agreement on, the kind of anti-war stuff or the kind of anti-capitalist stuff. I always thought, and again I'm kind of going on a bit of a digression here to my own opinion, but I always thought it was a bit of a mistake to assume too much historical continuity between what happened in Russia and what happened in Spain in any kind of modern activist groups, particularly in the US. I mean, people sometimes talk about these groups as if they're like a person, or, you know, like an individual that has like a distinctive personality. But really, they're just made up of the people who happen to be in the group at that particular time in history. So the people who are in anarchist groups now are completely different than the people who were in anarchist groups in 1937 in Spain, or the communists in 1937 in Spain. You know, most of those people are dead right now. The ones who are still alive are like in their 90s. And they are shaped by their ideology to a certain extent, but I've never really subscribed to this idea sometimes that somebody's ideology just takes over them. You know, like this whole thing about like communists are evil. Like, I mean, you know, that had been kind of a right-wing talking point for years or something. Like somebody believes in the collectivization of factories, and so all of a sudden they lose their soul. You know, that people can kind of attach ideologies onto themselves, but that doesn't mean that the kind of rest of their personality just gets suppressed by these political ideologies that they adapt or that they experiment with. Which is to say that I think any individual is much more shaped by their life experience than whatever personal ideology they happen to adapt. So, for example, an anarchist or a communist in the US in the 21st century is probably likely to be a middle-class college student, right? I mean, let's be honest. There hasn't been an anarchist movement in the working class for a century now. So they would be much more shaped by that middle class America experience than anything kind of in their ideology. I mean, it would be the same thing as like saying people who support a Republican form of government are likely to guillotine all their opponents, right? Just because of what happened during the French Revolution. Sorry if I'm going on a bit. Hopefully that makes sense to somebody. Admittedly, I'm just responding to something that I overheard once, and maybe I'm just rambling off on a tangent. Anyways, point being, to return maybe to the movie review, it's a fascinating story. Highly recommend it. See if you can track this down online somewhere. I think there's a copy on YouTube. Yeah, it's just a really interesting story of kind of what was going on in Spain in the 1930s, told through the lens of a Scottish anarchist who happened to be there.